Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mari Chan and welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing with the reading of Remnants of Filth, Volume 2, also known as Yooeh by Rou Bao, and we're covering chapters 42 through 46. I hope you all enjoy. Chapter 42, Catch Me If You Can. In the very first few days, Liwei's arrangements for Goo Mahng were non-existent. Morsi was dissatisfied with this state of affairs. What did I bring him to Shee-ha Manor for? He demanded stormily. It wasn't so he could just lie around here. Give him something to do. Today. Not today, Liwei replied hastily. Why ever not? Are you taking bribes from him? How could I? Liwei said. Besides, Goo Mahng doesn't even know what the word bribe means. Seeing Shee-ha Juan's cold and handsome face stiffen and freeze over, Liwei helplessly explained, My lord, although Goo Mahng learned a few rules at Luomei Pavilion, he still fundamentally thinks like a beast. He's awfully wary of you because he's lost fights to you before. Now that he's got a new home, of course he's tense and on edge. Are you speaking about a person or a cat? Morsi was clearly angry, but Liwei seized on his words like a lifeline anyway. He clapped his hands and said, my lord is so wise to see it at once. Just treat him as if he were a cat. Was there anyone more opportunistic in his flattery than Liwei? Yet, it worked. After being praised so effusively, Morsi couldn't possibly continue to rebuke Liwei. Morsi nailed him with a glare and let him keep talking. My lord, please think of it like this. A cat, when first taken home, is afraid of strangers, said Liwei. Only after it's grown familiar with its surroundings will it be willing to venture out and wander around, catch mice, and so on. Goo Mahng is the same right now. You see, he's a complete newcomer, a stranger to everyone. He's already hiding himself away in the most godforsaken places. Yesterday, I spent a shuchun looking for him. Guess where he was? I have no interest in where he secretes himself, Morsi replied coldly. Oh well, in short, when I finally found him, I didn't even have time to open my mouth before he scampered away. Morsi was still for a moment. Where was he hiding? He asked flatly. He was met by silence. The other servants nearby couldn't take much more of this. All of them truly admired how Liwei's eye only twitched before he continued on as calmly as before. The rice barrel in the granary. He paused, then added. After he scurried inside, he even pulled the lid back on. Morsi brought his palm to his forehead. Sorry. I'm so sorry. I think I already stated in the last video that this is one of my favorite chapters, so please excuse me in advance. Returning to the reading. Morsi brought a palm to his forehead, as if suffering a massive headache. So, my lord, Liwei said, even if this subordinate did want to speak to him and assign him work, I could scarcely find him in the first place. And even if I did, he'd run away at the sight of me. Morsi had no words. Sure, this all rather made sense, but why did it put him in a foul mood? In this subordinate's opinion, Liwei continued, we should ignore him for a few days, but don't scare him either. When he comes out on his own to sunbathe in the courtyard, I'll give him some work to do. Morsi thought it over and realized he had no other choice but to resign himself to this outcome. Give him the hardest work, he grumbled. Of course, of course. Morsi privately thought Liwei was too much of a kiss-up, but he gave good advice more often than not. Goo Mahng was indeed too bestial right now, creeping about like an animal who had just been brought to Shee-ha Manor. So Morsi carefully observed Goo Mangh's behavior for a few days and found that, just as Liwei had said, Goo Mahng spent his daylight hours hiding in dark and secluded corners. His eyes shone from the shadows as he stared warily at all who passed by. He discovered that Goo Mahng had two favorite hiding spots, one of which was the rice barrel in the granary. Once, unable to stop himself, Shee solemnly lifted up a corner of the wooden lid with a soft clatter, revealing 2 glimmering motes of light staring back at him, just as expected. Shee engaged in a staring contest with those 2 shining pinpoints. Finding this silent stare-down deeply awkward, he replaced the lid with another clack. But Goo Mahng evidently no longer considered the rice barrel a safe hideout. Shee hadn't even taken 2 steps when he heard the lid clack open again behind him. He looked back to see Goo Mahng clambering out of the rice barrel in a manner he must have thought stealthy. As Goo Mahng clung to the side of the barrel, he turned his head and met Shee's gaze, his foot still suspended in mid-air. They stared at each other in a wordless silence. And the next instant, Goo Mahng hastily squirmed back into the barrel and closed the lid again. Curious, Shee walked over and nudged the lid once more. This time, it seemed stuck, refusing to budge in the slightest. Goo Mahng had apparently grabbed onto the lid from the inside, engaging Shee in a covert standoff. Exasperated and amused in equal measure, Shee rapped on the lid. "What? Are you the beast of the rice barrel instead of the beast of the altar now?" Goo Mahng fidgeted inside the barrel. He pretended like he wasn't there, but kept his grip on the lid steady. Shee tried again to speak to him, but all his words went unanswered. His mood gradually turned sullen. In the end, he flicked his sleeves and decided he would waste no more breath on Goo Mahng. "Lunatic," he muttered under his breath as he turned to leave. When he checked the granary the next day, Goo Mahng had already abandoned the rice barrel as a hiding spot. Goo Mahng's other favorite lair was the wine cellar. After the rice barrel, this was his favorite spot to lurk during the day. However, Shee wasn't interested in paying him another visit. After all, the wine cellar was pitch black. He'd only be able to see those 2 faintly glowing eyes. That interested him not at all. Late one night, Shee was reading by lamplight when he heard rustling outside. He pried the window slightly open with his fingertips and saw Goo Mahng pacing about by the light of the moon. Goo Mangh's expression was mild, but his eyes were alert as they darted around his strange new surroundings. Many nights passed this way. Sometimes, Goo Mahng crouched on a stone bench to stare spellbound at the moon. His features were always placid and his eyes vacant. On other nights, he stared blankly at the fish in the lake. From time to time, he would stick a hand in to stir up the waters, the moon's glimmering reflection bathing his silhouette in cold light. But most often of all, and this truly dumbfounded Shee, Goo Mahng came out to forage for food. Shee didn't know exactly how voracious Goo Mangh's appetite was these days, but he found it quite excessive the few times he'd seen Goo Mahng eat. For example, tonight Goo Mahng had slipped into the dining hall. One stick of incense later, he finally lurched out with considerable difficulty. Under the pristine moonlight, this thief looked impossibly huge. He had slung across his shoulders 2 bamboo baskets laden with steamed buns. A rope of sausage was coiled around his neck, and a meat pie dangled from his mouth. Shee knew he must have taken the largest one from the basket. Goo Mahng was also clutching a heap of boiled corn. A few ears were pinned under his arms. "Is this a bear?" Shee muttered behind the slightly cracked window. The bear of the altar peered around, checking that he hadn't been spotted, then loped back into the cellar at top speed. He moved so fast that a few of the corn cobs in his arms unfortunately tumbled away. Stunned, Goo Mahng stopped in his tracks and crouched to pick up the fallen ears of corn. As soon as he moved his arms, however, the corn cobs pinned beneath them fell to the ground as well. He froze once more. After a second's thought, he shoved the corn in his hands under his arms and then nonchalantly reached down to pick up the newly fallen cobs on the ground. But as soon as he picked up the cobs on the ground, the corn beneath his arms fell again. He repeated this cycle of retrieving and dropping the corn over and over, again and again. Shee had no words. If Goo Mahng was truly pretending, he didn't need to go to all the trouble of being a war general after all. He could switch careers and become an actor at the Pear Garden. Footnote number 4, the Pear Garden, founded in the Tang Dynasty by Emperor Xuanzong, the Pear Garden is the oldest performing arts academy in China. Returning to the reading. Goo Mang stood in the courtyard in a state of complete befuddlement, staring helplessly for a long time. Eventually, he reached out a tentative hand to carefully pick a corncob off the ground. Nice, got it. The corncob under his arms fell once more. Gu Mang really could not understand what was going on, so he scratched his head, bewildered. The moment he did, a few corncobs tumbled out of his arms again. Morsi was silent. Perhaps it was because he couldn't stand watching any more of the stupidity. Perhaps it was because he thought Gu Mang's act was too flawless. Perhaps even because he sensed that Gu Mang wasn't putting on an act after all, and his mind was truly broken. Whatever the reason, fury roared up in Morsi's heart. Under its fiery influence, he flung the window open and thundered, "Are you dumb? Are you a pig? Can't you shove a few ears of corn into the basket on your back?" The servants in the surrounding buildings were all startled awake. They pushed open their windows to look outside, bleary-eyed. "What's going on?" someone shouted. "Are there monsters?" None of them had expected to see anything like the scene that greeted them. Silence reigned in the courtyard. Yet there was no end to Morsi's rage. "You don't even know how to pick up corn. The very sight of you annoys me." Even the meat pie had fallen out of Gu Mang's mouth. He turned his head to stare wide-eyed at Morsi. In response to Morsi's fierce and unfriendly expression, he grabbed an ear of corn and hurled it at him without hesitation. "And you dare to raise a hand against me?" Morsi snapped. Oh, God. I'm going to read that again. "And you dare to raise a hand at me?" Morsi snapped. Although Gu Mang's shot had missed its target, he still turned tail and ran off with his loot. He nearly tripped in his haste to flee, but his martial foundation showed itself in this moment. In the split second before he would have fallen flat on his face, he caught himself, planting a hand on the ground. Then he sprang to his feet and dashed into the cellar. Each movement flowed into the next as smooth as water, impossibly agile. Under the moonlight, golden ears of corn lay scattered across the ground. The servants and Morsi were all flabbergasted. Yooeh was first to react. He slammed his window shut and extinguished his lamp at lightning speed, as though he hadn't seen a thing. The other servants weren't so lucky and ended up on the receiving end of a severe dressing down from General Moa. "What do you think you're looking at? Hurry up and go to sleep." After having corn thrown at him before an audience, Morsi's bad mood lingered. He fumed the rest of the night and only managed to quell his fury by setting fire to 10 whole baskets of corn the next day. Still, he was disgruntled. As he stood by the pool feeding the fish, he asked Yooeh through gritted teeth, "How does he have the nerve to throw things at me?" Yooeh sighed ruefully. Their Shihajun was excellent in all respects, other than the fact that he was too fussy and had a bad temper. Thus, Yooeh cajoled Morsi as he peeled fruit for him. "Hiyo, my lord, what's the point in getting mad? If you got sick, that would be bad. Isn't it just an ear of corn? No one's happy when you're mad. Besides, what goes around comes around. Today he throws stuff at you, tomorrow you'll toss stuff at him. Just bear with it a little longer and it'll pass. Come here, my lord. Have a slice of pear." Morsi thought it over and realized that he indeed had few other options. He frostily accepted the pear without a word. Looking after Gu Mang was indeed like caring for an animal. As the days passed, Gu Mang gradually lowered his guard around the people of Shihe Manor. Sometimes he would creep out during the day and find a sheltered corner from which to silently survey his surroundings. When the courtyard was empty, he would sit by the pond and peacefully sunbathe for a spell. One sunny afternoon, Morsi was meditating under a tree that seemed to be filled with squirrels preparing for winter. Not only were the leaves rustling, but every now and then a shower of fruit pits would rain down from its branches. At first, Morsi was only slightly irked, but then a fruit pit smacked him squarely on the crown of his head. Never had he ever come across such an audacious little tree rat. His eyes snapped open as he glared up into the foliage, only to see Gu Mang perched on a branch high above. With his arms wrapped around the trunk, Gu Mang was shoving berries into his mouth with one hand while stuffing them into his cloth pouch with the other. His movements were rather clumsy as he grabbed bunch after bunch of berries. Sometimes, errant fruits slipped between his fingers and tumbled to the ground like coral beads. The object that hit Morsi must have been one of these. Morsi was instantly speechless with fury. Seething quietly, he leveled a ferocious kick at the tree trunk. Berries noisily rained down from the canopy. "Goo Mahng!" Morsi roared amid the downpour of fruit. Only then did the cheerful berry picker Gu Mang notice that someone was standing beneath the tree. He looked down, and his gaze met Morsi's. The two stared at each other for a long moment. Gu Mang remained silent, but his bulging cheeks twitched. He clearly had more than one berry in his mouth. "Get down from there," Morsi snapped. Gu Mang's cheeks moved again. He swiftly looped the little cloth pouch around his neck and clambered into a higher, denser section of branches, taking care to tuck himself completely out of sight. Morsi was on the verge of collapse. Great job. You sure you won't fall out and die?" Gu Mang tossed another pit down from his perch in answer. To this, Morsi had no response. Morsi gritted his teeth and endured Gu Mang's behavior for many long weeks, until the weather turned bitterly cold. One day, Morsi got out of bed to see Yooeh waiting outside his room. When he saw Morsi push open the door, he bowed and said, "My lord." Morsi glanced at him. Court was not in session today, and Yooeh wouldn't wait for him like this without reason. Morsi asked blandly, "Did something happen at the Bureau of Military Affairs?" Yooeh offered him an ingratiating smile. No, it's a different piece of good news." Chapter 43. Use me, then. When Morsi arrived at the main hall, Gu Mang was waiting there. "I spoke to him this morning. He didn't really respond, but he's not running away anymore," Yooeh said. "It seems he's settled in, so I'll give him some work to do starting tomorrow." Morsi's tall, stern silhouette remained still and silent in the doorway. His face showed no sign of cheer. After a while, he asked coolly, "Why is this person in my chair?" Morsi took his meals at the yellow rosewood table in the hall. Although two chairs were usually placed on either side of it, one was always empty. No one had ever sat in it. A clueless servant had once tried to take it away and provoked Shih-jun's deepest displeasure. The servant had two guesses about the presence of this chair. First, that the seat was saved for Princess Mengzi, and second, that the lord was such a perfectionist that the table had to look symmetrical. Not even Yooeh knew which was the truth. The other seat, at the head of the table, had always belonged to Morsi. Yet at this moment, it was occupied by Gu Mang, who clearly had no qualms about usurping the head of household's place. He turned to shoot Morsi an unconcerned glance. Morsi's face was cold as frost. "Get up." Gu Mang said nothing. He didn't move a muscle. Yooeh coughed and hastily strode over to Gu Mang. Quick, get up. The lord's angry." Gu Mang frowned. He didn't understand this phrase, "the lord." After all, Luomei Pavilion only had clients and managers. He looked at Morsi and assumed that Yooeh had addressed him by name. "Are you called lord?" Gu Mang's pristinely blank expression infuriated Morsi. In lieu of a response, he stepped over and stared Gu Mang down. "I told you to get up." Gu Mang still didn't budge, so Morsi reached out to yank him from the chair. Before he had so much as touched Gu Mang's lapels, however, the man leapt out of the chair and stood warily beside it. Although Morsi loathed Gu Mang, he wouldn't go out of his way to humiliate him. He was aloof and righteous by nature. He wouldn't do anything overly depraved unless pushed to the brink. He certainly wouldn't stoop to Murong Lian's level and send Gu Mang to a brothel. Still, he was grumpy from just having woken up, so he had even less patience for Gu Mang than usual. Yooeh feared the two of them would get into a spat and cause another scene, so he rushed in to admonish Gu Mang. "Ha! Look at you. Of all the places you could sit in this massive residence, you had to choose Shihejun's place of honor. Who do you think you are? You'd better pay attention and learn the rules from me, stupid. Morsi frowned in annoyance. Take him away. Yes, my lord. But Gu Mang refused. I want to sit here. As he spoke, he pulled out the chair on the other side of the table, planning to take a seat. Morsi's gaze flickered, as if that action had stabbed at some secret in his heart. You can't, he snapped. You can't sit there either. He paused briefly. Why do you want to be here? Gu Mang pointed at the table. Food. Morsi was speechless. I've seen it, said Gu Mang. Every day, food appears here. People bring it to you. Very tasty. He calmly met Morsi's chilly gaze. I'm waiting. You're waiting here for food? Morsi asked, his expression stormy. Gu Mang nodded. Morsi watched him silently for a moment, then his lips curled into a sneer. Gu Mang, who do you think you are? He turned around and sat down. When he spoke again, he didn't even look up as he adjusted the silver weapon compartment hidden in the trim of his sleeves. Liwei, get him out of here. Right away, my lord. Liwei paused before asking hesitantly, what about the food? Doesn't he have a pile of corn in his cellar? He can scram back there and chew on that. This time, Gu Mang spoke up before Liwei could respond. It's gone. Asked Morsi. I ate them all. Morsi looked up. You hauled 2 baskets of steamed buns, 4 or 5 ropes of sausage, and 7 pancakes. All gone. I don't know anyone in the dining hall. Too many people. I won't go in. Gu Mang said haltingly, his eyes cold and clear. Can only come here. Why can you come here? Morsi asked after a moment. Because I know you. You gave me water. Gu Mang paused. You taught me life worse than death. You also bought my... Gu Mang was interrupted by the crash of a wine cup smashing into the wall. Morsi's eyes gleamed darkly. Shut up. Gu Mang did as he was told. Liwei stood by helplessly, eyes flitting between the two. For the first time, he was at a loss as to how to smooth things over. Morsi sat at the table with his arms crossed and his expression icy. He gazed at Gu Mang inscrutably. After a spell, he raised his chin and asked slowly, Do you remember anything else? Gu Mang cocked his head in thought. In the end, he shook his head. Morsi lowered his lashes and scoffed. He looked up again. Then get lost. But Gu Mang didn't get lost. He quietly stared at Morsi's face, his eyes neither beseeching nor subservient. When he spoke again, his voice was flat and dispassionate, as though simply informing Morsi of an objective fact. He stood right in front of Morsi, his gaze so frank as to be impudent, and insisted obstinately. I'm hungry. Oh, Lord. The two locked eyes in a contest of wills. In the end, Morsi spoke first. Fine. But you spent 2 years at Luome Pavilion, so you should understand that meat pies don't fall from the sky. If you want to eat, then you need to work for it. Morsi leaned forward slightly, his sharp gaze bisecting Gu Mang's pale visage like a flashing blade that cracked his shell and aimed for the tender flesh beneath. His voice was deep and slow. Gu Shishong, I'll give you a chance to speak up for yourself. Tell me, what can you do for me? Black eyes stared into blue, glinting with repressed hatred. What do you want to do for me? What are you able to do for me? If you can convince me, I'll give you what you want. Just say it. Gu Mang looked at him in silence. A moment later, he held out an outstretched hand. Morsi's expression shifted. What does this mean? You can beat me. I won't die. Oh, my God. Gu Mang's face was devoid of emotion. But I get a meal for every beating. No beating without food. Morsi paused. This is another one of Luome Pavilion's rules? Yes. Morsi rose and turned his face away before he spoke. Remember, this is Shih Manor, not Wangshu Manor, and most certainly not Luomei Pavilion. I have no interest in abusing you. What are you interested in doing to me, then? A strange expression rippled faintly across Morsi's hands and face, as if he were recalling some unspeakable thing from the past. He quickly regained his composure and answered with icy arrogance. How would I know? Why don't you offer your services? Goo Mang was bewildered. Offer... It means just say it yourself, Morsi replied grimly. Gu Mang thought for a moment, then tried to submit another of his possible uses. Then, do you like to curse at people? Why is it either beating or cursing? Feeling wronged, Morsi retorted, Do I fucking look like that kind of person? Yes! Sorry. Liwei remained silent. Gu Mang pondered for a long while this time. When he spoke again, he sounded confused. I don't know. I don't know what else I can do. He stared at Morsi with those infuriatingly earnest blue eyes. His elegant face, usually as calm as still water, now seemed anxious. But I don't want to go back to Luomei Pavilion. I don't want to go back. Seeing him like this enraged Morsi for more reasons than one, but he didn't even know where to start. While he tried to tamp down his anger, Gu Mang piped up again. I also know how to sleep and eat. Are you interested? Faced with Morsi's silence, Gu Mang continued. I also know... He racked his brain for what further utility he had, until his face turned red from the effort. He couldn't come up with anything. Once he had been so strong and so clever, the most incredible young general in Chonghua. He was like a blazing flame that sparked with endless inspiration, hope, power, and love. In Morsi's eyes, there was practically nothing the General Gu of the past couldn't do. But his souls had been destroyed, his mind broken, and his fire extinguished. Now, this man was only the scorched earth left behind after General Gu had burned out. I don't know anything else, Gu Mang said eventually. He looked up at Morsi in resignation. That's all I can do. Gu Mang had the precise expression of a beggar child who hoped desperately to buying a piping hot steamed bun, and had fumbled through his clothes to discover only a single grubby cowrie shell. He didn't know if it was enough, but he still held out his only coin as he bit his lip in worry. Do you want to use me? On further thought, Gu Mang decided he'd better address Morsi by what he thought was his name. Lord? Morsi, who was still playing with the hidden weapon compartment in his sleeve, nearly cut his finger open. He couldn't muster a reply for a long while. There was an itch in some corner of his heart that wasn't quite right. He indistinctly knew what this feeling was, and that it was dangerous. So he quickly looked away from Gu Mang. Don't call me random names. You knew me in the past. My name is Morsi, he said with a dark expression. After a moment's thought, he added brusquely, Forget it. You should call me Shihajun. Morsi fastened the weapon compartment shut and stilled briefly. He turned back to Gu Mang. Listen up. Shih Manor isn't like Luomei Pavilion. No one will beat you or curse at you here. But because you're a criminal, you don't get a choice in most things. If you want to eat, you have to earn your keep. But I don't know. You used to know all these things, Morsi said. If you don't remember, Liwei will teach you again. Behave and do as he says. As long as you finish your work, you can come get your food. I get food if I finish my work? Yes, but you can't slack off. Understood? Gu Mang nodded. Then go. Morsi glanced at the water clock on the side table. Once you've done your work for today, you may come here for the evening meal. My lord, will you be needing another chair? Liwei hastily asked. Why would I? Morsi shot him a tired look. Isn't there an empty one right here? Liwei was at a loss for words. But haven't you been saving this ownerless chair for Princess Mengza all this time, like the rumors say? Still, he acquiesced, despite his confusion, and readied himself to leave with Gu Mang in tow. Before they reached the door, however, Mo-si called him back again. "Wait. Come here." "What is it, my lord?" Mo-si looked carefully at Gu Mang, then said to Liueh, "Go to the dining hall and tell the head cook I have some requests for tonight's dinner." He spoke a few more words to Liueh in a low voice, and then said lightly, "That's all. Just do as I say. You may go." The first task Liueh gave to Gu Mang was very simple, yet thoroughly exhausting: chopping firewood. Shizun is a cultivator, but most of the staff in our manor are ordinary humans. They can't summon a fireball with a wave of their hand, so we're still sorely lacking in firewood for the winter. Liueh pointed at the small mountain of wood before them. "Chop all of this. You won't get dinner until you finish." Gu Mang stared at the pile of logs, then looked at Liueh without making a sound. "Do you understand?" Liueh asked. "If you don't, then ask." At Gu Mang's silence, Liueh rolled up his sleeves and made a few chopping motions. "Chop firewood. Do you understand? Cut up all the wood." Gu Mang didn't seem to fully comprehend his meaning, but he had grasped the most important word: cut. Without saying yes or no, he picked up the axe stuck in the ground and turned to Liueh to confirm. "Cut these?" "Yes, cut these." "All of them?" "All of them." "Can't eat until I cut it all." "You can't eat until you cut it all." With that, Gu Mang turned and began to chop firewood without another word. Such work required little technique, but demanded a great deal of time and effort and was deeply dull besides. No one in Shih Manor liked doing it, but Gu Mang had no complaints. With his lips tightly pursed and sweat beading on his long lashes, he threw everything he had into each swing of the axe, as if he held a deep grudge against these particular logs. His enthusiasm was unflagging. With every log that disappeared from the pile, he got closer and closer to his meal. By the time the sky had darkened, the mountainous pile of timber had become a great heap of firewood. Gu Mang tossed the axe aside. Without even bothering to wipe the sweat from his brow, he went straight to the hall to collect his reward for the day. Although it was snowing heavily and wretchedly cold outside, the main hall shone bright with candles. Dishes, kept warm beneath thick lids, were arrayed on the rosewood table. A clay pot of soup simmered on a small stove, wisps of steam escaping to curl into the air. Mo-si sat there, waiting for him. Chapter 44. Crispy Roast Goose. "Sit," Mo-si said lightly. There was no one else in the hall. Gu Mang was certainly not one to stand on ceremony. He pulled out the other chair and quickly sat, then reached out and took the lids off the platters in front of him. There were 8 different dishes: sea cucumber sautéed with green onion, yellow croaker fish fried with green onion, venison roasted with green onion, beef stir-fried with green onion tofu, green onion egg drop soup, green onion pancake, as though someone in the kitchen had sworn a blood feud against green onions. The only dish without this vegetable was a whole roast goose arranged over a charcoal brazier to the table's side. After an entire day of swinging an axe, Gu Mang was so hungry he felt like a hole had been punched through his stomach. Without a care for Mo-si's reaction, he immediately dug in with bare hands. He spared not a glance for the jade chopsticks and plates on the table. First, he grabbed a yellow croaker fish and took a large bite. After chewing once, he spat it back out. Yuck! Mo-si didn't bat an eyelash. He watched Gu Mang with elegant poise from his chair at the other end of the table. Try a different dish. Gu Mang reached for a piece of the roasted venison with green onions. After a few nibbles, he spat that out as well. Does it also taste bad? Then try another. This time, Gu Mang hesitated, scanning the table full of dishes over and over. Cautiously, he picked a green onion pancake out of the bamboo basket. This time, he didn't immediately take a bite. He held up the pancake and sniffed at it, wrinkled his nose, then sniffed at it again, dissatisfied. In the end, he licked it, the tip of his tongue as delicate as a flower pistil. The sight of his flicking tongue seemed to stir something in Morsi's memories. His dark pupils glimmered as a hint of shadow flitted across his solemn features. He turned away. "I don't like this green thing," Gu Mang said a few licks later. His complexion took on a sickly tinge. "I can't eat it." That's hardly a surprise, Morsi thought. It would be stranger if you had liked it. Great numbers of people had once invited the former General Gu to share a meal with them, but very few knew his preferences. Goo Mahng, subject to the Murong clan's strict discipline since he was a child, had a kind disposition. He would never consider pointing out what dishes he didn't like at a banquet. Instead, he always thanked others for their generosity. Not even Murong Lian knew Gu Mang's disgust for green onions, despite living with him for so many years. Morsi, however, was very well aware of it. "What's the green stuff called?" "Green onion," Morsi answered, expressionless. Gu Mang pouted. "Then I don't like green onion." Morsi didn't reply. With a twitch of his finger, his spiritual energy set the flames in the brazier roaring higher. The roast goose had been stuffed with berries and skewered on a branch to roast slowly over a fruitwood fire, and was now golden browned and crisp. Morsi sprinkled salt on it and picked up a small knife. He leisurely cut off one of the goose's legs and passed it to Gu Mang. "Try this." Gu Mang accepted the food, but after having experienced the nightmare of the green onions, he was profoundly wary. He held up the drumstick and carefully inspected it, staring at the shimmering grease and burnished amber skin. Steam rose off it, carrying the savory aroma of meat and the smoky fragrance of fruitwood. Gu Mang swallowed unconsciously, yet still carefully asked, "There's no green onion?" "None." He bit down, the crispy, golden skin crackling between his teeth. The savory meat, running with hot juices and fat, instantly filled his mouth with flavor. Gu Mang polished off the drumstick in a few bites, even licking his fingers. Then he stared at the roast goose in the fire pit with shiny eyes. "More," he demanded. So cute. Strangely enough, Morsi took no offense at being ordered about like a cook. He even thoughtfully pushed the dish of sour plum sauce in front of him over to Gu Mang. Then he carved Gu Mang a full plate of roast goose and watched his unbridled delight as he ate it, without taking a single bite himself. "Do you like this roast goose?" Morsi asked. Cheeks bulging, Gu Mang mumbled, "Yes." "That's good," Morsi replied. His voice was even, without inflection. "This is the only dish I made. Everything else was prepared by the cook." Good job." Gu Mang tossed out a mindless compliment for Master Chef Moa before busying himself with the roast goose again. Morsi's voice clearly held far less allure than the goose's crispy skin. "Not really. I'm no good in the kitchen. A Shizun of mine taught me how to make this goose dish years ago, back when the two of us were stationed at a fortress on the frontier." Outside the window, snow flurries drifted down and onto the latticework, where they formed a layer of glittering crystal. Inside, Gu Mang was still engrossed with his food. Morsi spoke with a rare calm, like a beast trapped within the mire of memory, unable to summon its ferocity ever again. At the time, we were still low-level cultivators, looking out for each other within our own squad. Morsi paused. To be fair, it was more him looking out for me. He was 3 years my senior, and more advanced in both maturity and cultivation. Back then, I thought there was nothing on earth he didn't know. Be it supernatural mysteries or roast goose, he could explain anything perfectly. It was winter then, too, and we had just fought a hard battle. The enemy soldiers had attacked our supply lines and cut off our provisions. Our troop didn't have enough food, and what little we had was distributed according to rank. As Morsi studied Gu Mang, his gaze, usually so sharp, was uncommonly distant. "Neither of us had enough to eat," he murmured. One night, we were on duty, patrolling on either side of the camp. I don't know how he did it, but in all that snow, he somehow brought down a fat goose. He could have eaten it all himself, but for some reason, he cheerfully called me over. You know, I was in the middle of a growth spurt back then, so my appetite was actually much bigger than his. At this, Goo Mang paused and looked up. After a beat of silence, Morsi asked, "What's wrong?" Goo Mang licked his lips and dragged his plate closer to Morsi. "Give me another drumstick." Arching his brow, Morsi carved off the remaining drumstick and gave it to Goo Mang. Then, careless of whether Goo Mang was listening, he continued his story. He picked some berries from a tree. Goo Mang looked up and fixed him with another stare. Morsi pursed his lips. "There's no more. Each goose has only 2 drumsticks. Besides, you haven't even finished the one on your plate." But Goo Mang suddenly cut in, seemingly without rhyme or reason. "Berries are so good." Morsi paused and gave him a thoughtful look. "You're right, berries are good. That man also liked berries, and he often went to a lot of trouble to climb trees and pick them. He insisted that the difference between hand-picked berries and those struck down with magic was night and day. The roast goose recipe he taught me was very simple. Other than the goose, it only called for some salt and a handful of fresh berries." "You eat it with berries?" "No. The berries were for stuffing the goose. He skewered it with a branch and smoked it over pine and lychee wood," Morsi said. "We sat by the fire pit and added branches from time to time. Once the goose was golden, he sprinkled salt on it and took it off the fire. First he removed the berries, and then he dove right in. He warned me to be very careful." "Careful of what?" "We'd kept watch over that goose and smelled it cooking for so long, staring at it crisped and browned over the fire, watching its drippings trickling down. Obviously, we were ravenous after all that, and could hardly wait to take a bite," Morsi said lightly. "It was hard to avoid burning our tongues." "Did you burn your tongue?" "How could I possibly not?" Morsi's eyes were hazy and vacant. "You, on the other hand." Goo Mang gnawed on the drumstick and licked his lips. "Look, I didn't burn mine either." Morsi hesitated. "That's not what I meant. Forget it. It doesn't matter. Pretend I didn't say anything." Thus instructed, Goo Mang paid no more mind to aught other than his meal. He ate half the entire goose, then fell into a stupor as he stared at what remained. In the end, he didn't eat any more. "You're done?" Morsi asked. Goo Mang nodded. Morsi found this somewhat strange. Goo Mang's appetite seemed formidable these days, so how could half a roast goose be enough for him? But before he could give it more thought, Goo Mang asked, "Your Shizun, what was his name?" This question was like an arrow piercing his heart. Morsi's head snapped up and he met Goo Mang's eyes, which were clear and filled with open curiosity. In the face of that gaze, Morsi's heart slowly began to ache. "Goo Mang, are you pretending? If you are, how could you be so calm?" "That person," Morsi paused. "His name was—" What was his name? It was 2 simple syllables, but they lodged in his throat, unutterable no matter how hard he tried. Morsi choked on that name. He had spoken those 2 words so many times before, but now they were like the shards of a tender dream that had shattered years ago, stabbing him until his heart and lungs were full of blood. He couldn't say it. Desperately, as he tried to endure the pain he felt, the rims of his eyes gradually reddened. He abruptly turned away, and when he spoke again, his voice was much harsher than before. "What's the point of asking? What does it have to do with you?" Goo Mang answered him with silence. Morsi's interest in the meal waned. After Goo Mang left, Morsi's gaze fell on the sour plum sauce that had been next to Goo Mang's elbow. During the meal, Morsi hadn't explained what the sauce was for, so it had gone completely ignored. It remained perfectly untouched. Closing his eyes, Morsi seemed to hear a familiar voice. "Should he? Eating the roast goose by itself is no fun at all. Try this dipping sauce made from cooked plums. It's sweet and sour. When you take a bite of crispy skin with this stuff, whoa! The smile in that voice was audible. It's so good, you'll want to lick the plate. Even now, Morsi could still remember certain details from back then clearly. The pristine blanket of snow on the ground, the occasional flurries of wind-blown ash, the brilliant flickering of the fire pit, and the person sitting by his side, laughing as he played with pine branches. Goo Mang. Goo Mang had turned his head, features bathed in the warm glow of the orange flames. His dark eyes were so deep and bright. Come on, try this piece. I dipped it in the sour plum sauce. How is it? Is it good? Of course it is. When has your Gu Mang ever lied to you? I'm the most honest man in the world. I've never tricked anyone. Gu Mang's fists clenched against his will, his nails sinking deep into his palms. He had specifically carved the goose into many thin pieces for Gu Mang to eat. He had also made a point of talking to Gu Mang while he ate, because he knew that people became more easily distracted when they were preoccupied with two things at once. In the past, when Gu Mang ate this kind of crispy-skinned goose, he absolutely had to dip each piece in the sweet and sour plum sauce. Even if he forgot before he took the first bite, he would pause and dip it in the saucer before continuing. This habit of his was deeply ingrained. Morsi had thought that if Gu Mang was pretending, it would be hard for him to keep his guard up while he maintained the conversation. Gu Mang probably would have dipped the goose in the sauce at least once, just out of habit. But he did not. Gu Mang seemed completely oblivious to the purpose of this dish. That congealed dish of plums remained every bit as untouched as it had when Morsi first set it down. In contrast, the hope that had filled Morsi's chest when he pushed the dish toward Gu Mang had gone. Snow fell heavily beyond the window, but the remains of the feast before Morsi seemed colder than the winter wind. Morsi didn't know why a spate of violent resentment suddenly coursed through his body. Hate prickled hot in him, and he lunged and overturned the entire table of cooled leftovers with an almighty crash. Leeway was drawn by the commotion. He rushed in to find Morsi by the window, exhausted, face buried in his hands. His head hung low, as if the loss of his hope had taken with it his will to live. My lord, go away. My lord, why go to such trouble? It doesn't matter if he remembers or if he's pretending. The end result is the same. Why bother? No, it wasn't the same. The Gu Mang he wanted, the Gu Mang he hated, the Gu Shishong he admired, they should all be whole. They should be capable of fighting him, of wielding a blade to meet or to match him. Only within the enmity of betrayal could he draw gasping breath. Only then could he have a future to strive for. Only there could he have the satisfaction of taking revenge. Only there could he have hope. Only there could he have something beyond this debilitating feebleness that felt like punching a wad of soft cotton. He had his hatred and his resentment, but he had lost the only target upon which he could set his emotions loose. My lord! My lord! A servant ran into the hall. Leeway turned instantly to nail him with a glare, mouthing silently. Stop yelling! Can't you see Shih-Juan is in a foul mood? The servant had the look of being caught between a rock and a hard place. After a moment's hesitation, he nevertheless bent his head and made his report. My lord, the herald from His Imperial Majesty has arrived and is waiting outside. Morsi tilted his head minutely, his sharp brows knitting in a frown. Herald? Yes, the servant swallowed nervously. It's terribly urgent. He says that His Imperial Majesty, because of a certain matter of importance, requires you at once. Chapter 45. My turn to chain you. As soon as the servant said, a certain matter of importance, Morsi understood. Chonghua had an exceedingly shocking secret, one no more than 5 people in the entire country were privy to, and Shih-Juan was one of them. Morsi braved the wind and snow to travel to Qichan Hall and follow the attendant into the depths of the palace. Coal fires burned merrily in the grand hall. The two golden beasts lying before the brazier were singing the emperor's praises as usual. "His Imperial Majesty's fortunes flood the heavens," one of them cried. "His Imperial Majesty enjoys boundless longevity," crowed the other. All the attendants and servants had already been dismissed. Only the emperor remained, reclining on the couch with his face strangely pale. "Your Imperial Majesty." "Stove, you finally come," the emperor said weakly. "If you took any longer, we'd be dead." Morsi said nothing. The emperor was being overdramatic, but this was indeed Chonghua's unspeakable secret. The emperor was ill. The ruler of the nation was afflicted with a freezing illness, a chronic disease for which there was no cure. Although it wasn't immediately life-threatening, its progression was dependent on the patient's constitution and their fate. It could take as few as 10 to 20 years, or as many as 30 to 50 years, but in the end, the illness paralyzed the body. Which was to say, no matter how much care the emperor took with his health, at best he would succumb to complete paralysis when he reached his 50s. At the sight of the emperor's weary expression, Morsi sighed. "Your Imperial Majesty, please relax," he said. "I'll take the cold from you." The emperor nodded and leaned back against the cushions. He rarely had such obvious weak spells. Flare-ups of this freezing disease caused tremendous suffering. Only after a fire elemental cultivator drew out the cold and restored the blood circulation could the patient feel some relief. For this reason, the emperor sometimes called Morsi his stove. The emperor closed his eyes while Morsi transferred fire elemental spiritual energy to him. After a few minutes, the purple tinge from around his lips finally faded. Without opening his eyes, the emperor sighed. "Thankfully you were in the capital. Otherwise, we would have had to suffer. Even though Medicine Master Lian also has a fire elemental core, his spiritual energy is not as great as yours. He wouldn't have been able to resolve our problem like you did." The little golden beasts were still shrilly singing from beside the cold basin. "Fortune floods the heavens, boundless longevity." The emperor snorted. "Fortune? Longevity? Bullshit. In the past few months, our disease has flared up more and more often. Who knows how much time we've got left? If our illness was made known to the court," he sneered, "those slavering beasts would probably rush to disembowel and devour us until nothing remained." At this point, he finally opened his eyes a sliver and gave Morsi a canny look. "If such a day should ever come, Shizun would guard the doors of the palace hall for us, wouldn't he?" Morsi disliked such circuitous talk. He knew the emperor was trying to ascertain his loyalties, so he said directly, "The vow of calamity has already been sworn. What possible doubts can your Imperial Majesty possibly have?" The emperor laughed. "We're only having a little chat." But Morsi knew that this was no idle conversation. The emperor's position had come at a price, and he was suspicious of everyone. Many years ago, the emperor's birth mother had bribed the court physician to hide this illness of his, but the secret had been revealed when the previous emperor was near death. The late emperor thought that, if his son weakened while on the throne, Chonghua would be subject to threats from without and turmoil from within. For the sake of his country, the late emperor had considered stripping the then crown prince of his title. But the late emperor was not blessed with many children. He only had this one son, as well as his two daughters, Yanping and Mengzi. If he disinherited his heir on his deathbed, would he have to appoint his daughter as emperor? It was a ludicrous thought. The ascent of a female sovereign to the throne was completely unheard of in all the 9 provinces and 28 nations. The late emperor considered his brothers, as well as other sons who had been adopted into the Murong family. It was said that he had even intended to test the mettle of the child Murong Lian. But before the late emperor could make alternative arrangements, his condition took a turn for the worse, and he passed not long after. The masses were kept ignorant of the reason the late emperor had thought to demote the crown prince on his deathbed. It was widely believed that delirium caused by his worsening illness was to blame. The few who knew the secret had been marked with the most terrifying secret-keeping sigils, and thus hid the truth of the new emperor's disease deep within their hearts. The pleasant warmth of the fire energy flowed through the emperor's body, gradually dispelling the pain brought on by the freezing disease. The emperor closed his eyes in repose for a spell. "By the way," he suddenly spoke up, "Stove, it's been some time since Goo Mahng was brought to your manor. Has everything gone smoothly?" "It has." The emperor fell silent. After a long moment, just when Morsi thought he'd dropped the topic, he continued. "Do you recall when we sent you a letter asking for counsel on Goo Mangg's punishment 2 years ago? You hadn't much to say back then, but upon your return, I've noticed that your views have changed." Morsi didn't respond, instead continuing to quietly help the emperor expel the cold. The emperor didn't turn to look at him. He reclined listlessly on the low couch and continued to speak casually. "Stove, we know you're a devoted man. When you aren't in the presence of Goo Mahng, you only remember the ways in which he mistreated you. But when actually faced with him, you can't stop yourself from thinking of him as your brother and comrade. Is this not so?" Drops of water pattered down from the clock in the hall. When the emperor's cold had finally been dispelled, and he no longer felt so unwell, he sighed. "In truth, you're still conflicted. We can tell." Morsi remained silent. "You remember his malice, but you're unable to forget his kindness," the emperor continued. "You hate that he yet lives, but if you were really to see his blood spilled, your heart couldn't handle it." "Your Imperial Majesty." "Ayah, this is only natural," the emperor said wearily. "In all honesty, we've known how highly you still regard your old camaraderie since the day you took the vow of calamity to protect the Northern Frontier Army without hesitation. That knife dug into your heart, but it didn't gouge the past from your flesh. You cherish those old sentiments. There's nothing wrong with that." The cold had been fully dispelled. The emperor sat up and began to straighten his clothing, and his features regained their usual stubborn willfulness. While he smoothed the creases in his robes, the emperor looked up, fixing his eyes on Morsi as he spoke. "But there's something we must tell you, a consideration that comes first." Morsi didn't answer immediately. "Your Imperial Majesty need not warn me. I feel nothing for him." The emperor chuckled raucously. "If you truly felt nothing, you wouldn't have come to ask us for him." He retrieved a bracelet from the red sandalwood table and slowly fiddled with the beads. "Back then, you thought nothing of giving up a decade of your life, of taking on a lifetime's commitment to protect the soldiers he left behind. You even faced down their hostility to become the stepfather of the Northern Frontier Army. Now, these acts of protection are supposed to be hate? Do you think we're foolish or blind?" Morsi held his tongue. The emperor was no longer smiling when he continued. "Be that as it may, we wish to remind you that Goo Mahng is guilty of the crime of treason. The reason we've allowed him to live thus far is not in deference to either of your reputations, but rather because he is still useful." As the emperor spoke, his gaze did not waver from Morsi's face. "Goo Mahng is an enemy, and his crimes are unpardonable. Chonghua citizens are all eager to see his head struck from his neck. The day we are finished with him, or he can no longer be controlled, we will issue the decree for his execution." Morsi's lashes quivered slightly. "On that day, we don't want to see you get confused and stand with Goo Mahng." So my note was correct. Morsi usually accepted orders with decisive quickness, but now he was silent. The emperor arched an eyebrow. "If there's anything you'd like to say, Shih-jun, you should say it outright." "There isn't really," Morsi replied. "Truly?" "He did commit those crimes. His guilt is indisputable." "Ha! Why are you so boring?" Shih-jun had done as the emperor wished, yet somehow this made the emperor feel rather dissatisfied. Why can't you at least make a cursory attempt to beg for leniency and let us refuse you, then beg us again, only for us to refuse you again? That way, when you beg a third time, we can get thunderously angry and liven up the court with some excitement instead of this staid tedium." Morsi paused and looked up. "Then I do have a request." "Ah, that's more like it." "I want to do it myself," Morsi said. "What?" the emperor asked in astonishment. "On the day of Gu Mangg's execution, I want to do it myself." Give us a moment." The emperor held his forehead as he muttered, "How come it's not going the way we thought?" "I ask your imperial majesty to permit this request." The emperor had been rendered temporarily speechless. He sat motionless for a long while before he leaned back and clapped his hands. "Truly, dearest friends and mortal foes, you gentlemen are so interesting." Morsi looked back at him without comment. The emperor's light brown eyes flickered as he continued. "We fear you won't be able to do it. If the time comes when I cannot, I will hand it over to your imperial majesty to decide." The emperor stared at Morsi's face for some time, as if he wanted to unearth something from the other man's eyes, but failed to in the end. He heaved a sigh. "Shizun, why bother? He's just a brother from your youth, yet you insist on keeping watch over him, whether in life or in death." You. "In this lifetime, I've only had this one brother," Morsi said. "Both love and hate have passed through me. I no longer have any attachment. I only have this one request, and hope that your imperial majesty will grant it." The emperor spun his string of beads and considered it for a moment with his eyes closed. His mouth split into a grin. "We won't." Morsi said nothing. "A gentleman's man is gold, as they say. You won't convince us so easily." The emperor opened his eyes and set the bracelet down. "This matter is best discussed at a later date." Morsi seemed to have anticipated this and replied with no discernible surprise. "Very well." The emperor, on the other hand, was taken aback. Somewhat indignantly, he said, "You won't carry on? Beg us again. We'll refuse you again. Beg us once more, and then we'll lose our temper and thus liven up the court." Morsi refused to indulge his sovereign's perverse sense of humor and instead bowed in obedience. "Seeing as your imperial majesty has completely recovered, I won't continue to impose. The hour is late. I'll take my leave." The emperor pursed his lips. "Fine. Get lost. You're no fun at all." By the time Morsi returned to his manor, it was the dead of night, and most of the inhabitants were sound asleep. He strode through the main hall with displeasure written across his face. Morsi felt that he and the emperor were quite incompatible. Whenever the two spoke in private, they both ended up annoyed and unhappy. Expression stormy with frustration, he kicked open the door to his bedroom, intent on washing up and going to bed. He looked around the room and promptly stopped in his tracks. "Yooeh," he roared. "Come here." This angry snarl resonated through the entirety of Shih Manor, making the plants tremble and scattering the fish in the water. Afraid that he was in danger of losing his head, Yooeh scrambled forth as fast as his feet could carry him. "Ayah, my lord is back. Your servant was just feeding the horses in the stables and thus was unable to welcome you. My lord is magnanimous. Thank you for your forbearance." Morsi turned his head darkly, his gaze raking down Yooeh's figure like a pair of cold blades before eventually returning to land on his face. He stepped aside to allow Yooeh a good look at the situation in his room. "Explain." Morsi's expression was grim, his tone cold. "I merely paid a visit to the imperial palace. What happened here?" Yooeh craned his neck to see and... oh boy. The room was... how best to put it? Morsi's severe perfectionism and somewhat pathological tendency toward cleanliness meant his quarters were always meticulously neat. Forget any items out of place. Even the bedding needed to be folded with sharp and exact corners. Yet at this moment, the desk and chairs had been tipped over, the bed and curtains were a mess, the pillows had fallen into the ground, and a flower vase had been tossed on the bed. In short, it looked as though a thief had slipped in and barreled through the place like a maniac. Trembling, Liwei turned to look at Morsi's bloodless face, a cold prickle at his nape. He mumbled, I'll investigate at once. Get the hell out, Morsi snapped. Liwei nimbly scuttled away. Before the span of time it took to have a cup of tea had elapsed, he scuttled right back in. Morsi was still standing in the room, staring at his bed. He turned to address Liwei. What do you have to say? He asked stiffly. Liwei wiped the sweat that had beaded on his forehead from his run. He's one hell of a talent, he said, adding with a soft mumble. Honestly, what the hell? Liwei swallowed audibly, the jut of his throat bobbing. He struggled to find the words he needed. Finally, just as Morsi was about to lose his temper entirely, Liwei slapped his thigh and exclaimed, It's simply impossible to describe. My lord, come with me to take a look. That fiend is a damned genius. Morsi had heard enough of Liwei's vague pronouncements, so he followed him to the woodshed in the rear courtyard. If said structure could still be described as a woodshed, that is. Morsi had no words. Truly, a damned genius, Liwei exclaimed yet again. Within the space of the evening, an ordinary shed would have been surrounded by a dozen Tai-hu stones. Footnote number 5. Limestone rocks weathered intentionally in Lake Tai to achieve gnawed shapes and perforated surfaces, treasured as decorative fixtures in gardens and courtyards. That is the Tai-hu stones. Returning to the reading. Morsi thought he recognized a few. They'd apparently been appropriated from the fish pond. Various tables, chairs, and stools collected from all corners of Shih-ha Manor were balanced upside down on top of the stones. With all their legs pointed toward the sky, the shed's entrance resembled a hedgehog with all its quills sticking up. Someone had swiftly and single-handedly turned the Shih-ha Manor woodshed into an impenetrable animal den. Anyone with half a brain would be able to guess the creator of this masterpiece. Liwei's eyes were sharp. He pointed to the blanket hung over the entrance and wondered out loud. Huh? Shih-ha-jun, isn't this from your bed? Yes, of course it was from his bed. That was the snow silk blanket he meticulously folded every morning, and now it had become the curtain of the Bandit King's lair. Liwei, afraid that Morsi would really make himself sick from anger, hastily spoke again. Ayah, my lord, this is a good thing. Morsi was feeling faint. Good? He bit out. Think about it, Liwei wheedled. Before, Goo Mang was seeking out the rice barrel and wine cellar as hideouts. What did that mean? It meant that he was ready to flee at any time and wouldn't listen to commands, my lord, not even yours. And now? Now, Liwei cleared his throat and continued in a firm voice. Goo Mang has, with great effort, furnished himself a custom bedroom in Shih-ha Manor. Morsi pressed a palm to the pounding vein in his temple and cut Liwei off. I didn't realize your eyesight had gotten so bad. No, you're right. It's not quite a bedroom. Liwei took another look at the fortress of Tai-hu stones and, after a moment's thought, landed on a more suitable turn of phrase. Den. He's built himself a den. He continued. Animals build dens and birds build nests for the same reason humans build homes, to settle down somewhere for a long time. This demonstrates that Goo Mahng has been tamed by my wise and powerful lord. From now on, he'll be aware that he's here on account of your generosity. If my lord says to go left, he wouldn't dare go right. If my lord says to stop walking, he wouldn't dare move even if someone threatened to break his bones. Liwei was still spouting this eloquent stream of flattery when a rustling came from behind. The two turned around in time to catch Goo Mahng hauling over a pile of bedding that he'd filched from who knows where. A craggly black dog followed at his heels. It looked to be the same one that had been inseparable from him at Luomei Pavilion. At some point, the dog must have snuck out and gone on a quest to return to Goo Mangg's side. All of them, 3 humans and 1 dog. came abruptly face to face. I love this part. Blanket thief Gu Mang froze in place. So did Morsi. No one said a word. After a beat of silence, Gu Mang noisily flung the bedding over his head and calmly asked, "Can you still see me?" It took Morsi a moment to reply. So wait a minute. What do you think? Gu Mang. Gu Mang fidgeted uneasily beneath the blankets. Then he turned on his heel and sprinted away, feet pattering against the ground. The black dog ran after him happily, barking at every step. Just as man and dog were about to turn the corner and vanish, Morsi shouted, both furious and flabbergasted, "Get back here!" He was ignored. Gu Mang's footfalls only quickened as he sped up. Morsi leveled an icy stare at Yooeh, who was standing to the side, engrossed in the spectacle. "What was it you said?" he bit out. "Say stop walking, and he won't dare move." Well, Yooeh replied guiltily. Gu Mang was once the beast of the altar, after all. His beastliness still remains, even though his mind's a shambles. But look, my lord, he's much more willing to talk to you now. Isn't that so? Morsi responded in a towering fury. "Talk to me? What nonsense! Why haven't you dealt with the mess in my room yet?" "Right away," Yooeh said, stepping forward to take the blanket from where Gu Mang had hung it over the Tai-hu stones. Morsi stopped him. "What are you doing?" "Putting it in the laundry?" Morsi was choking on rage. "You think I'd still want a blanket Gu Mang used as a curtain?" he snapped. "Go to the storeroom and grab a new one." Yooeh made a quick noise of assent and diligently ran off. Morsi remained stuck where he was, staring first at the hastily retreating man, then at the corner around which Gu Mang and the dog had disappeared. Finally, he turned to stare at the den Gu Mang had left behind. He raised his hand to massage his nape, which throbbed with stress. It felt like he had exhausted a lifetime's worth of anger in these few days. Fucking hell. At this rate, he might as well go back to guard the frontier. If he continued to suffer trial after trial like this, he could probably ascend. However, Shizun, General Mo, was young yet. He was blunt and taciturn, with all his emotions written on his face. Unfortunately, the court was unlike the military. Here, passionate loyalty receded like the tides, while political intrigue and two-faced lies surged in. It was clear that his frustrations upon returning to the imperial capital had only just begun. Indeed, another round of annoyances awaited him. A group of old nobles, normally timid, had hatched a plan. They reckoned Shizun had his hands full with work, which meant he couldn't possibly watch over that bastard Gu Mang every minute of the day. If the scoundrel was once again exploited by someone like Lian, or if he was plotting something in secret, it would pose too many risks. Therefore, those old nobles presented a jointly signed document to the emperor requesting that Gu Mang be locked back up in prison. "Didn't Lian break him out of prison all the same?" Morsi asked coldly. "That was because the guards weren't vigilant enough. If there were more of them, surely—" "Surely what?" the emperor interrupted. "We have already given Shizun permission to take custody of him. If this agreement were so easily revoked, what would that say of us?" The nobles fumed and glowered and refused to back down. They started to wail miserably. Vexed by the commotion, the emperor yelled angrily, "Fine, fine, fine! Damn it! How about a compromise? Shizun, go get Gu Mang marked as a slave as soon as you can. It'll keep the criminal from escaping and reassure this lot somewhat." At the words, "marked as a slave," Morsi's heart stuttered. He looked up at the man on the throne. The emperor arched an eyebrow. Is there something Shizun wants to say?" A pause. "No," Morsi answered quietly. He closed his eyes. To be marked as a slave meant being collared, In accordance with Chonghua's laws, any operation involving a slave collar, whether fitting it or removing it, needed to be approved by the emperor and carried out by an artificer. That collar Moo-wrong Lian had covertly put on Goo Mahng back then was an unauthorized one. Later, after Goo Mahng had achieved great merit in battle, the late emperor had issued an edict to overturn his status as a slave. Naturally, the collar on his neck was removed as well. The old emperor had given Moo-wrong Lian a severe tongue-lashing over the matter. That day, Shee had been the one who accompanied Goo Mahng to the artificing workshop to have the collar removed. He had been wholly delighted for his sugar, thinking his sugar was so good he should be free all his life. That Shee had never imagined there would come a day when he, as Goo Mangg's new master, would lock that symbol of degradation and ownership back around his own Gu Sugar's neck. Chapter 46. Owner. As the court was in recess the next day, Shee took Goo Mahng to be registered as a slave. In most countries, slaves had no status. They were not permitted to cultivate or attend school and were referred to as the underclass. Chonghua wasn't fundamentally much different from the others, but it did treat slaves with a touch more lenience. Under the late emperor, Chonghua had abolished the demeaning term the underclass and made exceptions for slaves with aptitude. These few could enter the academy and cultivate spiritual cores. The late emperor had even appointed someone born a slave to the rank of general, and thereby allowed them to organize troops and serve their nation. These actions had once stirred enormous controversy in Chonghua. The old nobles put up fierce remonstrations, one after another. "History has proven this to be a mistake," they said. "The appetites of slavering beasts are insatiable. Your Imperial Majesty, if slaves are given a bit of power, they'll hunger for even more." What they meant was, if slaves were allowed to learn cultivation and establish themselves, it was only a matter of time before they would start eyeing the throne and rise in bloody revolution. Who would want to get trampled underfoot? But the old emperor didn't listen. Fire beacons were lit all across the 9 provinces, and skirmishes between nations grew more intense by the day. The old emperor thought that anyone with the appropriate talent should be allowed to put them to use. Even if civil conflicts were avoided, the threat of external conflicts still loomed. These were the circumstances under which Goo Mahng and his Wang Bao army had risen to fame. However, every emperor established his own court. When the new emperor succeeded to the throne, he feared civil conflict more than external threats. He took these fears out on Goo Mahng, demoting him and removing him from power in order to appease the established noble clans. This was how the current situation came to be. "We're here," the coachman announced. The carriage pulled up next to a small shop near the cultivation academy. Shee stepped out and knocked on the shop's door, which stood slightly ajar. The cramped entrance led to an old and dilapidated shop. A single wooden board carelessly propped up outside was the only sign, and it had been boldly inscribed with the words, "Cixin Artificing Forge." Footnote number 6. Cixin means kind heart. Returning to the reading. Part of the red paint on the word forge had worn off. "Where are we?" Goo Mahng asked. Shee didn't answer. He pushed open the flimsy old door and led Goo Mahng inside. The interior of the shop was poorly lit. There was no direct sunlight, and the room reeked of rotting wood. The stubborn proprietor was too stingy for lamps and relied solely on the light from the smelting furnace. Before that furnace sat a hunchback old man, slowly working the bellows. Red embers flickered madly within dark smoke, and dazzlingly orange molten iron flowed into the grooves like magma pouring from the depths of the earth. Footnote number 7. This is a quote from 17 Autumn River Songs by Tang Dynasty poet Li Bai, and that is red embers flickered madly within dark smoke. Returning to the reading. "Uncle Song," Shee called out. The old metal worker was fully engrossed in his work. He was rather hard on hearing and hadn't noticed the movement behind him. Morsi raised his voice. "Uncle." Only then did the old man turn his head, the fire's light shining on his wrinkled face. He looked exactly like a tangerine left out in the sun for too long, shriveled and yellow. Blankly, he looked at Morsi, then turned his gaze on Goo Mahng. Realization dawned on his face. He scrambled to his feet and bowed unsteadily as he muttered, it's General Gu." Goo Mahng remained rooted on the spot, thoroughly perplexed. Upon noticing that the old man was making obeisance to him, he clumsily mirrored the gesture. After a moment of silence, Morsi said, "He hasn't been General Gu in a long time." The doddering Uncle Song asked blankly, "Is that so? Oh, so what is he now?" "A prisoner." Astonished, Uncle Song stared blankly at Goo Mahng for a long time. "Prisoner? A prisoner?" he muttered. He took a slow step forward and grasped Goo Mangg's hand in his wrinkled palms. After a befuddled pause, he smiled and began babbling incoherently. "Ayah, Xiao Gu, you've lucked out. See, Uncle didn't lie to you, did he? There are more good people in the world than bad. From now on, you'll no longer be a Wangshu manor slave." As he spoke, he jubilantly patted the back of Goo Mangg's head. "Come, Uncle will take off the collar on your neck." The old man's nonsensical mutters sent a flash of agony across Morsi's vision. He closed his eyes, and his throat bobbed as he swallowed. Just as he was about to speak, he heard a muffled noise from upstairs. The wooden steps creaked, and a gentle voice called out, "Shizun, what brings you here?" Morsi turned to see a man in flaxen robes hobbling down the stairs with his cane. It was Jiang Yeh-shoe-eh. Jiang Yeh-shoe-eh was the owner of this artificing forge. Uncle Song had been an artificer in Yooeh Manor and had been Jiang Yeh-shoe-eh's first and oldest mentor. After Jiang Yeh-shoe-eh was cast out of the Yooeh clan, this old retainer was the only one willing to take him in. "I brought him here to be registered as a slave," Morsi said. Jiang Yeh-shoe-eh was startled. "Who?" Morsi's eyes turned his tall and stately figure to reveal Goo Mahng behind him, who was looking around inquisitively. General Gu," Jiang Yeh-shoe-eh muttered. Uncle Song wasn't about to be left out of the conversation. He slapped his disciple's back with one bark-like hand. "Today's a good day. Yexue, take a look," he said happily. "Our Xiao Gu's made it now. Isn't he the first slave to have his status revoked? How hard it must have been." After a moment, Jiang Yexue sighed. "Shifu, that all happened long ago." I misremembered something again?" Uncle Song asked, perplexed. "Yes, back then, I could still walk and run." Jiang Yexue lowered his lashes and smiled as he spoke to the old man. "Shifu, you're tired. Why don't you go rest?" Jiang Yexue helped the old man out of his room and settled him before he returned to Morsi and Goo Mahng. "My apologies, Shizun. Shifu hasn't been making much sense these past few years. Please don't hold it against him." "Of course not," Morsi replied. Goo Mahng blinked and echoed Morsi's words. "Of course not." Morsi glanced at him. Today, the gaze he leveled at Goo Mahng wasn't sharp, but rather slightly cryptic, as though enshrouded in the shadows of the past. Jiang Yexue saw all this pass between them and heaved a soft sigh. "If he's to be registered as a slave, please follow me upstairs." "But your legs," Morsi began. "I have the cane," Jiang Yexue smiled. "Don't worry, I can walk." The trio climbed to the second floor of the smelting shop. It was much brighter here, with all sorts of weapons made from condensed spiritual energy hanging from racks on the walls. Nowadays, the weapons wielded by cultivators were most often forged with spiritual energy. As a cultivator went to an artificing forge and selected a weapon they liked, the artificer would meld this weapon with the cultivator's spiritual core. When they wanted to use the weapon, they only needed to think the incantation and the weapon would be summoned. Those types of weapons weren't as powerful as holy weapons, but they were still formidable, as the principles behind their creation were similar. In an effort to create even more fearsome weapons, artificers traveled the land to seek out different types of spiritual ingredients: the beaks of fire phoenixes, the claws of Jiao dragons, the tusks of sky-swallowing white elephants. The more fiendish the spirit beast, the stronger the spiritual power, and the more formidable the resulting weapon. Some artificers even forged vengeful spirits into their weapons, which would summon said spirits in battle. The water demon talisman passed down through Wangshu's family was an excellent example of this. Rumor said it had been created with 9,000 drowned ghosts that seethed with resentment. The same idea was also behind the forging of the sword spirit Li Qingqian. But Jiang Yexue's artificing forge was different. Forget the old man downstairs, half-blind and ridiculously senile. Jiang Yexue himself was a soft-hearted man whose kindness bordered on absurdity. He couldn't bear to step on an ant, let alone fight phoenixes and slaughter dragons. The thought was completely ludicrous. The spiritual energy we use in our weapons is all derived from flora, said Jiang Yexue. He turned and saw that Moshi was staring at his windowsill, which made him feel somewhat self-conscious. The spiritual forms drying on the sill were all soft and pliable. One could tell at a glance they were not very useful. The kids from the Cultivation Academy come here to buy weapons. They're unlikely to hurt themselves with these. There's nothing wrong with that, said Moshi. Jiang Yexue offered him a small smile. His artificing techniques had originated within the Yue clan, but the way he put them into practice was entirely different. Yue Zhongtian pursued sheer power above all else, and Murong Chuyi didn't care if his inventions were cruel. Since he was a boy, Jiang Yexue had always clashed with his father due to their philosophical differences. It was often the case that, unless they met with extreme suffering, people's beliefs were difficult to change. However, Moshi thought that even if Jiang Yexue hadn't lost his wife, he still would have eventually parted ways with the Yue clan. Jiang Yexue retrieved an iron box from the shelf piled high with artificing materials. He brushed off the dust and brought it over to Moshi and Gu Mang. Years ago, Moshi had accompanied Gu Mang to remove his slave collar, so he was intimately familiar with this box. Knowing this, Jiang Yexue hesitated and glanced at Moshi. "Shihejun, I'm about to perform the spell," he said. "Would you like to step out of the room?" Moshi's features were perfectly composed. He looked at that pitch-black box without any hint of emotion. "I'm fine." "Okay, then I'll begin." Jiang Yexue put the box on the floor and then spoke to Gu Mang. "Gu." He had already opened his mouth, but he still didn't know how best to address him. In the end, he sighed. "You, please sit. Close your eyes. Put your hand on the box." Gu Mang calmly obeyed the first two requests, but he refused the last one. He opened his eyes again, stared at the box for a time, then finally mumbled, "I don't like this thing." He looked up at Moshi. "I'm leaving." "Sit down," said Moshi. "Leaving. If you want to stay at Shihe Manor, then you must do as this person says," Moshi warned. Gu Mang didn't really have a choice. He pouted, looking both wronged and wary, but after a moment's hesitation, he put his hand on the box. "Perform the spell," Moshi told Jiang Yexue. Jiang Yexue nodded. Back in the day, Murong Lian's slapdash procedure for conferring a slave collar had been badly conceived. The collar's inherent power was considerable, so putting it on carelessly could cause the wearer's spiritual energy to go berserk or even result in their death. However, no one in that crowd of youths back then had been aware of these risks. The master artificer Jiang Yexue lowered his gaze as he chanted the incantation. Nigh instantly, a stream of black spiritual energy issued from the hole in the iron box. It coiled like a snake along Gu Mang's arm, from his wrist to his shoulder to his collarbones. At last, it looped itself around his neck and coalesced into a ring of black iron. The final tendril of smoke became a little tag hanging off its side. "It's done." Gu Mang opened his eyes and touched his neck without a word. Very quickly, he reached up again, this time turning his head and mumbling pensively, Necklace. Morsi was leaning against the window, all long legs and narrow waist. When he heard Goo Mahng say this, he stared blankly. What? Did you give me a necklace? Goo Mahng asked in astonishment. Silence. Goo Mahng didn't respond, but Jiang Yexue couldn't help himself and nodded. At this, Goo Mahng's blue eyes sparkled brilliantly. He touched the slave collar again and again, his face shining with cautious joy, looking every bit as kind and gentle as it had in the past. He turned to Morsi and said, Thank you. A humid breeze blew in through the window, ruffling the wisps of hair at Morsi's temples. He stood with his arms crossed, wordlessly studying Goo Mangg's profile from a few feet away. The Goo Mahng before him was like shattered fragments of the former General Gu. Morsi wanted to see the shadow of his old friend in him, but in the end, this was all he would get. Those jagged shards left the rims of his eyes red and stinking. While no one was looking, he closed his eyes in despair and swallowed with difficulty. Many years ago, it had also been on the second floor of Cixin Forge, in this very room, that the young Goo Mahng had likewise touched a slave collar, his smile radiant. That collar had been removed by Uncle Song. It's over, Yushisong. You won't belong to Murong Lian anymore. Morsi, gazing at Goo Mangg's face, had solemnly said, You're free now. Back then, the collar was being taken off, and Goo Mahng had been smiling. Time had slipped between them, bringing change with its passage. Now, the collar was being put on, yet Goo Mahng was still smiling. Now, nothing seemed to have changed, but Morsi felt as though a bitter olive was stuck in his throat, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't swallow it. This bitterness felt like it would follow him for the rest of his life. Wait a moment, Jiang Yexue said to Goo Mahng. It's not over yet. I still need to add a few words to this necklace. What words? Your name and registry number. He flipped through Chonghua's slave registry records and looked up the number of Goo Mangg's collar. Here, 790. Goo Mahng didn't know what this meant. He sat listening without comprehension. Jiang Yexue used spiritual energy to engrave those characters into the collar. After he finished with the front, he flipped the tag around. This time, he looked not at Goo Mahng, but rather at Morsi, who stood with the light from the window behind him, his face cast in shadow. Shizun, ask for the other side. Let's not, Morsi said. But I'm afraid it may go against the rules. If we're not inscribing an individual's name, it should at least be a noble's family name, or the name of the manor. None of that is necessary. Morsi paused, then turned away. Jiang Yexue sighed. But the other side still needs to be engraved? Goo Mahng piped up. With what? It does, Jiang Yexue told him. It needs to be engraved with your lord's name. Goo Mahng furrowed his brow thoughtfully for a moment. Just as Morsi was about to impatiently tell him they were leaving, he suddenly said, I know whose name to carve. He turned to look at Morsi. Yours. A pause. What are you talking about? Morsi retorted. You're my lord. Lots of people call you that. Morsi closed his eyes, brows dipping in a deep frown. You talk too much. Hurry up and come with me. We can't engrave your name? No, Morsi snapped. For some reason, the mere thought of his name inscribed on something looped around Goo Mangg's neck sent a burst of frustrated heat coursing through his blood. He shook his head in annoyance, as if shaking off a mosquito that disturbed his peace. Grabbing Goo Mahng by the back of his robe's collar, he pulled him upright and said to Jiang Yexue, Elder Qingxu, farewell. I'll see you off, Jiang Yexue replied. There's no need to trouble yourself with your condition. Jiang Yexue smiled. It's nothing. Don't worry about it. Besides, I needed to go to the West Street for some pine oil anyway. Wait a moment. I'll grab some money. Where's your wheelchair? Morsi asked. I'll fetch it for you. It's not good to be sitting all the time. My cane will suffice. Jiang Yexue slipped some coins into his Chenqing pouch. Let's go. The three of them headed to the general shop on the West Street. Jiang Yexue asked the shopkeeper for 2 jugs of pine oil. As he was waiting for the shopkeeper to fill the bottles, the curtain at the door fluttered and a youth strode in. "Hey, shopkeeper," the youth hollered. "Have all the things we ordered arrived yet?" This shout was followed by a cold and stern voice. "Behave, Chuhn-ching. Don't jump around like that in here." Mo Xi and Jiang Yexue turned their heads to see Chuhn-ching, who had just blown in like a winter gale. One step behind him was the white-robed Murong Chuyi. Neither party had expected such a chance meeting. The two groups stared at each other blankly. Murong Chuyi seemed especially taken aback. His severe phoenix eyes fell on Jiang Yexue and immediately narrowed. Neither spoke. The atmosphere turned tense. Murong Chuyi's older sister was Yue Juntian's first wife, while Jiang Yexue's mother was Yue Juntian's concubine. Both women had since passed, but the events of those years remained fresh in the memories of the two members of the younger generation. "Chuyi," Jiang Yexue said quietly. Murong Chuyi didn't say anything. With a sweep of his sleeves, he turned to leave. Chuhn-ching hastily tried to call him back. "Fourth uncle!" But Murong Chuyi had already lifted the curtain and walked out of the shop. His frosty voice filtered backward, filled with palpable anger. "Chuhn-ching, nothing good happens when I come out with you." In a moment of desperation, Chuhn-ching completely ignored Jiang Yexue as he stumped his feet and cried, "Fourth uncle, it's not like I knew he was here. Don't go, wait for me." But Murong Chuyi replied, "Don't follow me." How could Chuhn-ching dare disobey? He stood there dejected, looking back at everyone else. The room fell quiet. Jiang Yexue let out a sigh and finally broke the silence. "Chuhn-ching, Chuyi still treats you like this?" Well, alrighty, folks. We have reached the end of the readings of chapters 42 through 46, and oh my god. Freak man, there's just so much. Where do I even begin? Honestly, there's just so much happening in these that sometimes I feel like I can't even sort out my thoughts properly to give you notes at the end. Nevertheless, I guess I'll start by saying that these chapters were probably some of my favorite that I've read thus far, even when I first read them, just because they were so adorable. Or I'll say Goo Mang was adorable. We got to finally see him act his nature, or his filtered nature, I'll say, his created nature, since he has this bestial mindset right now. But seeing him go to the Shee manor and just be like nervous and everything like a little kitten and hiding in places was so cute. And it reminded me of when my husband and I had gotten our dog for the first time. He kind of was just walking around really nervous and whining and like, what is this? What new place am I in? Or even when we had first taken him and we were driving home from like a far destination, because I think we had driven like 2 hours to go get him, and we stopped at a gas station and I took him out so that he could go use the restroom, and the collar, the thing that we had on the leash, he slipped from out of it and he ran away from us, and I was like, come back, no, but he wouldn't listen. And so just seeing Goo Mahng act like a little wolf, a timid wolf, was absolutely hilarious. And chapter 42 was the funniest, just seeing him be more animalistic. And I would still say, though, even though Goo Mahng was being cautious when moving into the manor, I still think that he was more comfortable in Shihajun's presence, even before he truly officially became comfortable and created his den in the later chapters. And the reason I say that is because these things that he's doing, even in his cautiousness, he wasn't able to do that, say, like in the pavilion, in Luomei Pavilion, or even at Murong Lian's actual place. So the fact that he feels comfortable enough to be like, okay, well, let me go hide somewhere, I feel shows another layer of comfortability. And, you know, I can get that because he's allowed to roam free and everything around the manor. Like, he's not locked up anywhere. They're just like, let him get comfortable and then we'll put him to work. Now, as for going to the next point, as for the servants and their theories on why Morsi had this second chair in the room, I already knew it had nothing to do with Princess Mengsa and nothing to do with him wanting symmetry, which I will say the whole symmetrical thing is definitely a good guess because clearly Morsi is a very meticulous guy and likes things done a certain way. But I was just certain that that seat was there for Gu Mang, which is why when Gu Mang officially, when he told him to sit there and Leeway was like, don't we need to get another chair? And he's like, there's one right here. I already knew. I was like, yeah, that seat was for Gu Mang, for the promises that he made to Gu Mang forever ago that he wanted to fulfill. So, yeah, there's that. Next, I want to go to page 112. It's crazy. Actually, nothing really happened there, but it's the fact that, let me go to it. When Gu Mang and Morsi were kind of at a standstill because, you know, Gu Mang wanted food and Morsi told him to get lost and Gu Mang was not doing it. And he was like, I'm hungry. I immediately was like, give him food, give him food. Thinking about what happened in the previous book when he went berserk. I was like, nope, if it was me, every time Gu Mang said he was hungry, I'd be like, here you go, baby. Here's the food, whatever you want. Anyway, nevertheless, I think it was a fair trade for Morsi to tell him, like, you work to earn your keep and then you can get food. But I must say, it really hurt my heart that in the negotiation process, Gu Mang was mentioning all things that were hurtful to him. You know, just saying, okay, well, if you want, you can beat me. I won't die. If you want, you can curse at me. That just, it really hurt my heart because even though he is beast mind, is wolf mind, and doesn't have memories and stuff like that, at the end of the day, he still knows that those things hurt him, you know? And so for him to offer those things in spite of the fact because he wants food, it just, that hurt my heart so freaking bad. Oh my God. Anyway, I'm glad Morsi was like, hey, this is not Luome Pavilion. This is not Murong Lian's place. That's not how we're going to be doing things here. All right. So, but yeah, just that hurt. And Gu Mang's desperation to not want to go back to Luome Pavilion and him like trying hard to think of what he could offer Morsi, that also hurt as well. When he was like, crap, I can't do anything. Like, I have nothing to offer you. And him being afraid, like, oh my God, am I going to go back to Luome Pavilion? And being resigned. Oh my gosh. So then on page 115, when Morsi made the specific request for tonight's dinner, I thought I'd tell you guys what my note said, which here it said it was Gu Mang's faves, possibly. Oh, how wrong I was the first time I read this. Because the next chapter, when they finally ate, it turned out to all be a freaking test. Test after test after test, which is crazy, but genius at the same time. Serving the dishes with the green onions. I just thought it was funny. Gu Mang would like eat it and then spit it out. And he's like, I don't like this. I don't like this either. And then becoming wary, like, dude, what? I don't think I like this green thing. What do you call it? And then finally, with him passing that test, being given the roast goose, and then sliding over the sauce and then just eating and, you know, passing that test and even listening, I would say Morsi talking about the past was in itself a test as well, because if Gu Mang remembered anything, there could be a pause in his movements or some kind of physical showing of hesitance or remembrance, but none of that happened. And so he passed the test. Nevertheless, I was sad for Morsi because he was sad that Gu Mang does not have any of these memories. And for him, it just hurts because it's like the one person where he would like to put his anger toward, his hatred toward for the betrayal, and the one person that he even would like to reminisce on the good times and like his desire and everything, he can't put it on that one person. And he's not the type to go out and just lash out at other people and beat them just for the heck of it. And so for him to not have that one person that he wants to do that to, I definitely feel his pain and his grief. It sucks. And then going to my next note, it was interesting at first when I first read it and the emperor called Morsi his stove. I was like, what the heck? Why is he calling him a stove? But fortunately, we got the answer very immediately. So I thank Meat Bun for doing that. So just a quick recap. Yeah, the emperor is sick. And this sickness causes him to get really, really cold. So he needs a fire elemental cultivator, like Morsi, to remove that coldness from his body, basically, infusing spiritual energy into him or whatever. And so when just going to that whole ordeal between them, when the emperor was asking him about his loyalties, essentially, I knew that something was up. And it's like, even though the emperor was saying to Morsi, like, I understand the feelings that you have and everything, it's perfectly natural, yada, yada, yada. I was like, okay, yes, he understands human nature. However, this is, in my opinion, some kind of warning from Morsi. Him, which he did say, like, hey, remember, he's a traitor. He did this, he did that. So you need to be sure where your loyalties lie, because don't get it twisted. Once Goo Mahng outruns his use, I'm executing him. Okay? But it was nice for Morsi to mention, like, hey, I mean, I took the vow of calamity already. So, like, I'm not going to turn traitor, dude. Anyway, going to my next point. Morsi asking His Imperial Majesty if he could be the one to execute Goo Mahng when that day finally came. I was just like, sir, are you a masochist? Do you want to hurt yourself? Because there's no way I could kill my husband. If it was his execution day, I would not be like, okay, when that day comes, let me do it. The fuck? Absolutely not. So that's just scary. Also, the emperor is too bored. He needs to go find some entertainment that has nothing to do with Morsi. So, but staying on this, so now we have the whole slave collar thing, which really is unfortunate for Morsi to have been there in the past when Goo Mahng got his slave collar removed. And, he was so happy for Goo Mahng. He's like, you're free now. You are a free man. Only to turn around because these nobles are so afraid of what would happen, if Goo Mahng went loose or something like that, that he has to put a slave collar back on him. Like, Goo Mahng might be happy in this instance, in both instances, but for Morsi, I feel so bad with him knowing the history and everything. It's just like, it's heartbreaking, as a witness. Anyway, my last little bit on page 148, we have Jiang Yexue, which it's nice to see him finally come back in. But it says that he himself was a soft-hearted man whose kindness bordered on absurdity. He couldn't bear to step on an ant, let alone fight phoenixes and slaughter dragons. So, with that line being said, just the soft-heartedness and kindness to the point of absurdity, I'm not even going to lie with y'all. And no, this isn't some kind of spoiler or anything like that. Because like I said, I only read to volume 3.5, I'm going to say. So I don't know anything. But because of how Meat Bun did me in ErHa, in which I won't give details on that, with a sweet and kind person, I'm like, okay, knowing that Jiang Yexue is this kind to the point that it's absurd, I don't trust him now. Is there anyone else like that? Because that is how I feel. Because I'm just like, Meat Bun, what turn of events is going to happen where this man is actually going to be the one who's scheming and plotting in the background? Is he part of the reason why Goo Mahng turned traitor? Does he have something to do with this? I'm overly suspicious. I am the emperor. I am overly suspicious now. So anyway, that is pretty much all that I have to say. I look forward to reading the next few chapters, and I hope you all enjoy them. And I shall see you all next time. Oh, for those who are on my Patreon, I am going to go ahead and say that we are going to do a live reading next Saturday. That is going to be August the 30th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. With this, we will actually be reading volume 3, like the first 3 or so chapters of volume 3, because we're going to be done with the chapter before Saturday, and we're going to be done with volume 2, before we get to next Saturday. So I just wanted to let you all know that. Otherwise, anyway, like I said, wa aynimen.